Many of you have been asking me to share my game against Hikaru Nakamura, and there we go. I'm playing white, Hikaru is black. I opened up with the move pawn to b3, one of my favorite openings for blitz, putting the bishop over here, exerting strong pressure along this diagonal, and also taking opponents out of their opening prep. Hikaru responded with pawn to e5, quite standard, bishop b2, already attacks this pawn, therefore knight to c6 defends it with a knight. Pawn to e3, and here black played pawn to d6, which is quite a prudent move. It actually builds up this barrier on a way of the bishop, and therefore it tries to limit it. In most cases, people play pawn to d5, just trying to grab the center, but after that this pawn on e5 is somewhat weak, and white plays bishop b5 pinning the knight, then knight f3 attacking this pawn once more, and that allows white to build up their initiative. Instead, Hikaru played pawn to d6. He's a strong player, he knows this stuff, he plays right moves. Bishop b5 is what I played, nevertheless trying to pin down this knight and then to break open the center with the move pawn to d4 so that the bishop comes back to life. Hikaru played knight to e7, supporting the other knight so that later he can recapture with the other one without ruining his pawn structure. I played pawn to d4, pushing my plan to open up the center and to open up this diagonal for the bishop. Hikaru plays pawn a6. By the way, that's the first little thing that I would ask you to pay attention. Like, very often at the lower rated levels, you can see that whenever one plays a move, the opponent always reacts. So black either captures here or plays e4 or maybe defends the pawn somehow, but they're very reactive to what your opponent is doing. And you can see that GMs, they rather push their own plan instead of just reacting to what their opponent is doing. So Hikaru played pawn a6 correctly. He's ignoring this threat. He says, hey, let's decide something about this bishop. I dropped it back because in this position, taking on c6 makes less sense. Again, black will not ruin their structure, they'll instead recapture with the other knight. So I just dropped the bishop back. And now black still has this pressure, and black played pawn e4, which is actually a bit of an inaccuracy because it allows white to push d5. But of course, it's just an inaccuracy. I'm not saying that it's anything dreadful for black. So d5 is the move I played here, and this is what white wants to achieve. Now this bishop is active along this diagonal, and it's nice. Besides, we're attacking this knight, forcing black to span a move. Knight e5 was played, now pawn to c4, just building the central pawn structure, knight to g6, giving way to the bishop to be developed, knight to c3, developing a knight, and as well as attacking this pawn on e4, and therefore Nakamura defends it with pawn to f5. Here I played a move pawn to h4, which sacrifices a pawn because black can, and Hikaru did, capture the pawn as well as create threat to this other pawn on g2. And at first it may seem like a blunder, but in fact it makes some sense, so I kind of like this move, although Stockfish does not like. He says, come on bro, I'm a pawn up and I eat challenges for breakfast. But against a human, I think that it's a good move to play. Now, first let me share what is white's plan here. In general, again, I want to capitalize on the strength of this bishop along this diagonal, and we anticipate black to castle there kingside, so that my plan will be to castle queenside, and after that I can try to chuck pawns on the kingside somehow and try to create an attack there. So that is overall my plan. Now, so what about this move pawn to h4? Well, it sacrifices a pawn, and now it attacks this pawn, but after g3 it forces the knight to go, and after knight goes back to g6, the position remains to be more or less the same as it was, but now I've got this open file for the rook. And since black is going to castle there, it's going to castle right into my attack. So, or at least that's what I'm hoping for, okay. So anyway, that was what played. I played knight to h3, the knight needs to be developed. Knight to e7, knight f4. That's another little advantage of this pawn sacrifice. I could develop a knight with some little bit of an extra tempo for this g3 move over protecting the knight. Now, this knight on f4 is pretty nice. It eyes this e6 square, maybe it can trade off or go knight h5 in the future, and black never really wants to take it. Hikaru didn't, because if black takes, that only helps white. After pawn takes, now this knight is pushed away from its active square, and now white has not just one but two open files on the king side. So that's not what black wants, clearly. Therefore, instead, Hikaru played king to f7, which actually turns out to be wrong, but it's very difficult to understand it at this point. It's clear that black was afraid of castling kingside, again, because there is this rook, and it feels unsafe for black to do so, but it turns out that on f7, the king is even more vulnerable. Anyway, at this point, it's hard to see this. I played queen c2, just continuing with my plan to castle queenside. And here black played bishop f6, putting bishop opposite to my bishop to potentially neutralize this pressure. I castled queenside, and Hikaru borrowed my idea and played pawn to b5. Just like I sacked a pawn to open up the file here, black wants to do just that. He wants to sacrifice this pawn on b5 because I can capture it, but instead he'll open up this a file for his rook. So he's doing the exact same thing. So if I were to accept this pawn sacrifice, yes, I'm a pawn up, but now this rook is getting more active. Well, actually, I'm not a pawn up because I was down a pawn before this exchange. Although I didn't take there, and that was good. Once again, coming back to that earlier point, if you remember that, very often you see that stronger players are not reactive. They try to push their own plan, okay? So my plan is not really to capture this pawn. My plan is to try to create an attack against this king. And therefore, instead of capturing this pawn, I decided to sacrifice another pawn. So I played knight e6. And this knight is monstrous here. It attacks the queen and a lot of squares around, therefore black cannot tolerate. They have to take it, which is what Nakamura did, but after this exchange on e6, the king has to be centralized, which is the only piece that you really do not want to centralize in a game of chess. Although the position still remains to be unclear because there are a lot of pawns here and the king is well defended by all these pawns and pieces around it, so it's still not easy for white to break through. Here I missed the mark. I captured this pawn on b5, which seemed to make sense for me because I wanted to also open up this diagonal for the bishop so that maybe in some future the bishop can go there and attack the king. Computer though says that g4 was stronger, and it was indeed stronger, again continuing with the same idea. Instead of just deflecting to something else, grabbing pawns or something, just going after the king, trying to split up these pawns and go after the king. So that's the idea of another pawn sacrifice. That would have been quite a nice move, but I missed it unfortunately. I played a more trivial move, just capture the pawn on b5 there. Bishop takes, pawn takes c6 is what Hikaru played, attacking the bishop and also potentially preparing for the other pawn to move forward and build up this really nice pawn structure in the middle of the board. Bishop went back to e2, queen to c7, connecting the rooks. Here I played that right move, pawn to g4, because that's the only way to get to the king. We need to split up these pawns, and after that attack the king. At this point, it looks like white is almost winning, because it looks like this king on e6 is deadly exposed, but nevertheless, the game continues, and there was a lot of exciting thing going on after that. After g4, black captures here on g4, queen takes over here on e4, and black plays pawn d5, pushing this queen away. But it doesn't have to, because there's bishop takes g4, which is a counterattack of this king. The king goes back to f7, and now white needs to deal with this threat to the queen. Therefore, I play queen f5, potentially ready to infiltrate there. So therefore, black captures here on g4. And we gotta give due credit to Hikaru. He actually defended really well. And although just a couple moves ago, his position seemed nearly losing, but right now it's balanced once again. Yes, this king is a little bit exposed, but so is white. King over here, and black has some open files there. These bishops are neutralizing each other. So position actually became somewhat balanced. So Hikaru bounced back, good defense. Here he played pawn to h6. He just wants to make this rook available to get into the game, because so far it always had to defend this pawn on h7, thanks to my rook putting pressure there. And therefore h6 aims to defend the pawn and free the rook to do something more constructive. I played king b1. At this point, it's not easy for white to attack rapidly, so I also played this prophylactic move so that the king defends this pawn on a2 just in case, and black cannot attack it. Nevertheless, black played queen a5. So, after Hikaru solidified his position, he's ready for his counteroffense. Now, queen a5 actually attacks this knight on c3, and it cannot walk away easily, because besides that, black is also putting pressure to a2. It may seem for a second that black took over the initiative, but I continue playing also in the counter-attacking style, and I go rook g1, challenging his knight on g6. And queen takes g6 is quite a strong threat, therefore black has to do something about that. He played knight e5, attacking the queen, played queen h5, check to the king. In tense positions, it's usually recommended to play forcing moves, which are checks, captures, and attacking moves, because otherwise you just waste time and you let your opponent build up his initiative. And after you play a forcing move, that forces your opponent to do something about that. So black played pawn to g6, attacks the queen, and the queen goes back to h3. From here, there are no immediate threats, but nevertheless, the queen controls this diagonal, and if possible, let's say if this knight moves away from e5, queen will be ready to enter the home rank and start some damage there. Here, Hikaru went into the all-out attack by going rook f to b8. And that's a move where you burn the boats and you say, I'm going all out, and either I win or I lose, like, that's it. Because that leaves this king really vulnerable and undefended. But after rook to b8, black actually concentrated all of his forces on the queen side. So that makes the position really tensed. Now, why did he play there? Well, because if not this, it's not that easy for black to figure out what to do. Perhaps he could defend it somehow, but all this construction looks quite vulnerable and shaky, and it looks like if white were to play f4 or e4, black's position will probably fall apart quite soon. Therefore, Hikaru decided to take his chance and just go into this all-out attack. Rook to b8. I played pawn f4, kicking this knight away because that's right now the main defender of black king, and Hikaru continued playing all out with knight to c4. And now we've got quite a spectacular position where black really gave up on his king and just said, hey, you know what, I don't care, I want all of my forces to attack this king, and this is exactly what he does. It's beautiful in a way because you see that all of black's pieces are attacking white's king, while this king is kind of like, of course, risky, but it's not that easy still for white. So the game remains to be very interesting. Now it has to do something. I mean, of course, white cannot accept this knight sacrifice, and I didn't, because if pawn takes, I mean, perhaps black has even a number of ways to win, like rook takes b2, for example, and here queen to c3, something like this would lead to a nasty checkmate, so definitely that's not what white wants. Defense is the best defense, so I played queen d7 check. And once again, when you play forced moves, it makes your life easier. You don't have to calculate a lot of the options for your opponent, because now he has to react and defend. He played bishop e7, and after that, once again, white still has to do something. There's probably no way to defend the king, therefore I have to attack myself. So I play rook takes g6, which is a sacrifice, but in this position it's kind of natural, because there's not much white can do besides that anyway, but it's strong. It's kind of forced, but strong. King takes, and after queen to e7, now this king is really exposed. And after rook g1 is coming, so it's clear that black's in trouble. And therefore Hikaru sees that he has no time for knight to b2 or something like that, and he plays back queen d8, try to trade off the queen and also bring at least one defender closer to his king. I went rook g1, check to the king. Now the queen cuts off the 7th rank, therefore the king has to move bravely forward, king to h5. Here I played queen f7, check to the king h4, and queen to g6. Now this king is nearly checkmated, but what also I kind of respected Nakamura that he never backs down. He's a super tricky guy, and even when he's completely lost, he always finds the way to somehow create some tricks, or at least to try to flag his opponent and do something. I remember I had another game against Hikaru where I was like winning. I had like an extra queen or something, but he had like a knight or a bishop, and he didn't allow me to trade it off, and he just danced around and he flagged me. Ultimately I lost on time, although I'm a GM and having an extra queen and losing the game, that's ridiculous. But at that point I realized that he's got this really good talent for blitz to complicate matters and to be tricky. So at this point I knew that although it looks like white is nearly winning, that is true, but I still have to be careful. So black played knight d2, just trying to, I guess, gain some time because it checks the king. King goes here, and here queen to g8. Now again, trying to trade off one of my attacking pieces. And at this point, I was stupid enough to miss not one, but two checkmates in one. Now, I could have played queen takes h6 checkmate, could have played rook h1 checkmate. I missed them both. Well, my bad. Don't want to come up with excuses, that was just silly. That was actually a bullet game. And at this point I realized that I can play queen f6, which is what I did, which is check to the king, and I can grab the queen. So I noticed this idea, I saw that I'm winning the queen, and I said, okay, let's go for it. Again, that was clearly wrong because it misses the checkmate in one, but I saw this idea and I just didn't look for anything else, I just played it. For king to h3, here I played queen f5. Once again, kind of the bullet strategy. In bullet you want to not let your opponent play their pre-moved move. Okay, so in this position you can anticipate that perhaps black pre-moved rook takes g8, anticipated rook capture. Again, given the fact that I'm still missing the fact that I can checkmate black in one. So instead of letting black, make that pre-move and playing queen f5 check, just the in-between move, forcing black to actually make a move and spend some time, so in bullet it still counts. King h2, rook to g8, now I'm winning the queen, that's cool, rook takes. Normally white would need to recapture the knight, but once again I'm using the same bullet strategy. Queen h5, playing an unexpected move, forcing black to make a move. So after king takes d2, black probably have already pre-moved rook to g2 check. So queen h5 forces black to do something else, spend time. King g1, king to d2. Now I'm up like two minor pieces and king is still exposed. Rook to g2 check to the king, and here after king d3, black ran out of time and therefore I won. The position is winning for white anyway, so knight e2 is coming. White's up material and this king is still vulnerable. So that's how the game ended. That said, I definitely not trying to pretend like I'm a stronger player than Nakamura. He's the second highest rated Blitz player in the world, and I actually focus on chess. I quit competitive chess a number of years ago. So clearly he's a stronger player, but in this particular game, things went in my favor. Now, that being said, a lot of people ask me, how can GMs play pretty good chess even in Bullet when you only have a couple seconds per move normally, or even 1-2 seconds per move? Well, if you're curious about that, there's this free masterclass where I elaborate on exactly how I think while playing a game of chess so that you can simply model it. So if you're curious, click the link over there and check it out. And if you haven't seen my game against Magnus Carlsen, click over here and check it out. That was also a fun game to watch. Thank you for watching. Take care.